The showrunners of The Lord of the Rings of Power, are taking us back to Middle-earth. Now that the whole season's out, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have been talking about their favorite and most difficult parts of the show, and how they came up with them. In this video, we'll discuss some secrets you might have missed out on, and look at what we want to see in Season 2. First off, how they built relationships. Right from the start, Payne and McKay wanted Sauron and Galadriel to have something going on between them. They hoped that after the last episode aired, we'll watch the whole season again, which would be a different experience now. They were worried that people who knew a lot about the story might be 6 or 7 episodes ahead of the characters. If lying's an important part of the journey, they wanted book readers to have the same experience. McKay plans for Sauron's character to be given the same importance as Galadriel's in the first season. They want to fully explore the character's history in a way that the original trilogy never did. Galadriel feels betrayed and angry, and she's mad at herself and him. But Sauron thinks his plan's justified, and even believes in some twisted way that he's doing the right thing. Galadriel even repeats what Halbrand tells her about the tides of fates moving to Frodo in the trilogy. That only shows how much of an impact meeting Sauron had on her. Up next, how they introduced Sauron. The whole point of exploring Halbrand was to introduce Sauron's character. Payne and McKay shared that they didn't tell Charlie Vickers he was Sauron before making the show. Only then did they brief him about what would happen in each episode. They didn't use the name Anatar instead of Halbrand, because that would just give everything away. There are many clues that he's Sauron though. In his very first shot, he has one eye looking over his shoulder. His second line is, "Don't believe what you see." One of the first ideas that they had for the plot came from the part of the Fellowship of the Ring, where Frodo offers the ring to Galadriel, and she's tempted by it. She talks about how well she knows and understands Sauron. It shows that she has a dark side. This can also be seen in how she thinks turning down the ring's a test she has to pass before she can finally go west, and that her darkness is connected to how she feels about Sauron. They wanted to tell the story of how Sauron came to be, and didn't want to make a show about finding Sauron, but loved the idea of Sauron as a liar who could, hopefully, fool some of the audience. It looks like the showrunners were going for a mic drop moment that only the best directors have ever pulled off, followed by some of the show's inspirations. Apparently, the show's got many cool artistic inspirations. The idea of Galadriel and Halbrand meeting at sea is based on the Raft of Medusa, a neoclassical romanticist painting that hangs in the Louvre. He was surprised that no one else saw the connection. The painting shows the real-life story of a ship called the Medusa that sank at sea, leaving the survivors on a raft to eat each other. Milton writes about Satan in Paradise Lost in a way that makes him a very interesting person, so the show's creators were going for the same portrayal with Sauron. Galadriel and Theo hide out under a log in Episode 7, but that's the only thing that links Bakshi's and Jackson's movies together. Moving on to Mithril, legends in the show, and Numenor. The source of Mithril's magic is one of the most controversial ideas in the show. Everyone who was interested in Tolkien's original mythology was against the idea of adding more to the lore. The show's creators came up with the grand unification theory that could link the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, which went into the Silmarils, to the rings. Mithril was used to make at least some of the 3 elf rings, so it was a way to tie together so many parts of the story, like the elves going away. Also, Galadriel knows that if she told Celebrimbor about Sauron, he wouldn't make the rings, so that the elves can stay in Middle-earth and keep fighting him. She needs the rings to be made. Regarding the Nazgul, they were loosely based on 3 witches in Macbeth. That's because in the original lore, we know they're from Rhuan. We also know that there are magic cults in Rhuan, because Tolkien writes about them. So maybe there's a slightly different kind of magic, and in future seasons we'll be able to find out what it is. Also, Lawrence of Arabia was one of the movies that inspired the show. He loses his children to politics and war in the first season of Rings of Power, but he will eventually lead some people from Numenor to safety and freedom. The style of Numenor is directly based on the classical Raphael painting of Athens and the Vatican. Tolkien's famous myth of Numenor was based on the ancient Greek stories of Atlantis, which Plato made famous in his stories about Athens. Now, let's look at some things we want to see in Season 2. The first season just ended some time ago, and we've got issues with what we saw on screen. Some complaints are valid and should be dealt with, while others aren't as pressing and should be ignored. The showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay said that audience reactions would affect expect future episodes. This means that changes could happen as soon as the second season, which has already started filming. With fans speaking up and a lot riding on this show, the first-time showrunners have a lot to do and think about before the fifth and final season. Here are the things we most want to see in Season 2 of The Rings of Power, not to mention cast diversity and Tolkien's stories. Even before the first episode aired, the show got a lot of bad press, but the racist backlash was the worst and most unjustified. When people saw Lenny Henry, they said that black people didn't live in Tolkien's world and that black characters should be taken out. But black hobbits and elves were seen in the first episode and throughout the whole season. This showed that the actors were chosen because they were good actors and not because they were tokens. Most of the cast for the second season will be the same as for the first, but many more characters from Tolkien's vast Middle-earth will be added, so there will be plenty of chances for the right people to get roles, regardless of race or color. The first series stayed mostly true to his vision, but not so much to his canon. Every shot is a stunning work of art, and every scene tells a great fantasy story, but it's often accused of being based on Tolkien's ideas, not his books. The first season played fast and loose with a lot of Tolkien's writing. It added a lot to his story, but many of us were upset that Prime Video didn't use the lore they bought for hundreds of millions of dollars. The showrunners Payne and McKay said that Season 2 would be more true to Tolkien's stories. Let's learn more about a balance of story and action. The show broke records and became Prime Video's most popular series, but many people complained that the first half was boring and the second half didn't get interesting until a volcano blew everything up. There are a lot of exciting scenes in the show, both in terms of action and story, but there was never a balance because whole episodes were either filled with fighting or had too much talking. Every episode of the second season can have a good amount of action and story, so we'll be happy with every episode. Coming up, we need to see more rings. The all-powerful rings show up at the very end of the last episode of the first season, when the 3 elven rings are made. Since Tolkien's Lord of the Rings has 20 small rings of power, we spent almost the whole season wondering where they all were. When the second season comes out in a few years, we should see more of the elven rings, but there are still many more to be made, especially Sauron's one ring to rule them all, which decides the fate of all Middle-earth. The Rings of Power also allow us to see what these small pieces of jewelry are really capable of. All of us know how important the rings are, but even Tolkien needs to learn what they can do or how powerful they are. In the Rings of Power, they're meant to let the elves stay in Middle-earth, since they can't live without the light of Valinor from their home realm. This is a big change from Tolkien's stories, but what about the rings for the dwarves and humans? People want to know what the rings can do next and how they will change Middle-earth. Finally, theories about Season 2. In Tolkien's stories, Sauron's the best servant of the Dark Lord Morgoth, and he can also change his appearance and use it to trick and control his enemies. So far, though, the show hasn't done much with that trait, though it has helped show how he can trick people. The second season has promised to focus more on Sauron as a character, and the story may finally use Sauron's disguises, either as part of his backstory or as a twist to reveal later on. Regarding Sauron's actions and plans, there are also several interesting ideas that could be explored in the next season. Given that Isildur has a lot more to do in Tolkien's timeline, Season 2 will likely find the son of Elendil alive and well, but lost in the wastelands of Mordor. One interesting possibility is that Halbrand Sauron meets Isildur, who doesn't know who Halbrand is, and that the Dark Lord tricks Isildur. But whatever happens, guess we'll have to mark our calendars for when Season 2 drops. And on that note, that's a wrap for this video. What do you think of how Sauron's origins are explored in the show? And what are you most looking forward to seeing in Season 2? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.